Have you ever agreed to something you didn't want to do simply because you couldn't bring yourself to say no? Maybe you've taken on extra work when you're already overwhelmed. Maybe you've said yes to plans when you desperately needed alone time. Or maybe you've helped someone even when it drained you completely, all because the word no felt impossible to say. If this sounds familiar, you're not alone, and you're not weak. People who struggle to say no aren't pushovers or people pleasers in the shallow sense. There's a much deeper psychology at play. These are often individuals who've learned that saying no comes with consequences, rejection, disappointment, conflict, or abandonment. So they say yes over and over, even when it costs them their peace, their energy, and their well-being. Let's explore the psychology of people who struggle to say no and understand what this pattern is really protecting you from. But before we dive in, if you're enjoying this exploration of human behavior, consider subscribing to Mura Psychology for more insights into the psychology that shapes who you are. Saying no is one of the most fundamental acts of self-preservation. It's how you protect your time, your energy, and your boundaries. Yet for many people, saying no feels almost dangerous. It triggers anxiety, guilt, or fear, and those feelings are so uncomfortable that saying yes, even to things they don't want, feels like the safer option. Psychologically, the inability to say no is often rooted in childhood experiences. Children learn early on how their caregivers respond to boundaries. If saying no led to anger, rejection, or emotional withdrawal, they learned that their boundaries aren't safe to express. They learned that to maintain connection and approval, they need to be agreeable, accommodating, and always available. This survival strategy made sense when they were young and dependent, but as adults, it becomes a prison. There's also the fear of conflict. People who struggle to say no are often conflict-averse. They've learned that disagreement or disappointment leads to rupture in relationships, so they avoid it at all costs. They say yes to keep the peace, to avoid tension, to maintain harmony. But this comes at a steep price. They sacrifice their own needs to manage other people's emotions, and over time, this creates resentment, exhaustion, and a deep sense of being unseen. Another factor is the need for external validation. When your sense of worth comes from being liked, needed, or appreciated, saying no feels like risking that validation. If you're not helpful, if you're not available, if you're not saying yes, will people still value you? This fear drives people to overextend themselves, to be everything to everyone, because their internal sense of worth is shaky. They're trying to earn love and acceptance through availability and compliance. There's also a component of guilt. People who struggle to say no often feel guilty for prioritizing their own needs. They believe that saying no is selfish, that it makes them a bad person, that it hurts others. This guilt is often disproportionate to reality. Most of the time, saying no doesn't devastate the other person, but it feels that way because of the stories they've internalized about what it means to be a good person, always giving, always accommodating, never putting yourself first. Now let's explore the 5 key traits that define people who struggle to say no. If you recognize yourself in these traits, know that learning to say no isn't about becoming selfish or uncaring. It's about reclaiming your right to have boundaries and honoring your own needs. The first trait is people-pleasing and fear of rejection. People who can't say no are often deeply afraid of being rejected or abandoned. They believe, consciously or unconsciously, that their worth is conditional, that if they disappoint someone, that person will leave. So they say yes to everything, hoping that their constant availability will secure their place in other people's lives. This fear often stems from early attachment wounds. Maybe a parent was emotionally unavailable unless the child was being helpful or compliant. Maybe love felt conditional on good behavior. Whatever the origin, the message was clear. Your value depends on how much you give. And now, as adults, they're still trying to earn love through self-sacrifice. The tragedy is that this approach often attracts people who take advantage, because when you never say no, you teach people that your boundaries don't matter. The second trait is poor sense of self and weak boundaries. People who struggle to say no often have difficulty knowing what they actually want. They're so focused on what others need that they've lost touch with their own desires, preferences, and limits. This weak sense of self makes boundaries feel impossible. You can't defend a boundary if you're not sure where you end and others begin. You can't say no if you don't believe your needs are as valid as everyone else's. Building the ability to say no requires first developing a clearer sense of self. It requires asking, what do I actually want? What do I have capacity for? What feels right for me? These questions might feel foreign if you've spent years prioritizing others, but they're essential. The third trait is over-responsibility for others' emotions. People who can't say no often feel responsible for how others feel. If someone is disappointed, they believe it's their job to fix it. If someone is upset, they blame themselves. This over-responsibility is exhausting. It means you're constantly managing other people's emotional states, often at the expense of your own. The truth is, you're not responsible for how people react to your boundaries. You can say no with kindness and respect, and if someone responds with anger or manipulation, that's information about them, not evidence that you did something wrong. Healthy people accept no without punishing you for it. Unhealthy people make you feel guilty for having limits. The fourth trait is chronic guilt and self-sacrifice. People who struggle to say no often operate from a baseline of guilt. They feel guilty for resting, for having needs, for taking up space, for not doing more. This guilt drives them to constantly give even when they're depleted. They say yes because saying no feels like failing someone. This pattern of self-sacrifice might look noble from the outside, but it's not sustainable, and it's not healthy. You can't pour from an empty cup, and constantly saying yes when you want to say no doesn't make you kind, it makes you resentful. True generosity comes from choice, not obligation. When you say yes because you're afraid to say no, that's not generosity, it's self-abandonment. The fifth trait is difficulty with assertiveness and confrontation. People who can't say no often struggle with assertiveness in general. They avoid confrontation, they minimize their own needs, and they struggle to advocate for themselves. This difficulty often comes from a belief that asserting yourself is aggressive or mean. But there's a difference between aggression and assertiveness. Aggression violates others' boundaries. Assertiveness protects your own. Saying no isn't an attack, it's a statement of your limits. And learning to be assertive doesn't make you difficult or demanding, it makes you honest. Understanding these traits can help you see that struggling to say no isn't a personality flaw, it's a learned behavior, one that developed to keep you safe in environments where boundaries weren't respected. But what protected you then might be hurting you now, and you can learn a different way. If you're someone who struggles to say no, building this skill takes practice. Start small. Say no to low-stakes requests. Practice the words out loud. Notice what feelings come up. The discomfort you feel when saying no is just that, discomfort. It's not dangerous. It's not proof that you're doing something wrong. It's your nervous system adjusting to a new pattern. It's also important to recognize that you don't need to justify every no. You don't owe people elaborate explanations for your boundaries. A simple, I can't, or that doesn't work for me, is enough. The more you explain, the more you invite negotiation. Your no is valid on its own. Another helpful shift is reframing what saying no means. It's not rejecting the person, it's protecting yourself. Every time you say yes when you want to say no, you're betraying yourself. You're teaching yourself that your needs don't matter. Saying no is an act of self-respect. It's saying, my time, energy, and well-being matter too. Research shows that people with strong boundaries report higher levels of life satisfaction and lower levels of stress. They have healthier relationships because those relationships are built on honesty rather than obligation. Learning to say no doesn't push people away. It attracts the right people, people who respect your limits and value you for who you are, not just what you can do for them. Cultural perspectives also matter. In many collectivist cultures, saying no is discouraged because community and harmony are prioritized over individual needs. But even in these contexts, there's a cost. People burn out. They lose themselves. Healthy cultures find balance between collective responsibility and individual well-being. You can care about others and still have boundaries. The two aren't mutually exclusive. If you're someone who struggles to say no and you've been saying yes to everything for too long, let this be your permission to stop. You're allowed to have limits. You're allowed to prioritize yourself. You're allowed to say no without guilt. The people who truly care about you will understand, and the people who don't aren't people you need in your life. So the next time someone asks something of you and your instinct is to say yes, even though you want to say no, pause, take a breath, and try saying, "Let me think about it." Give yourself time to check in with what you actually want. You might be surprised by how often the answer is no, and that's okay. If this resonates with you, take a moment to reflect. When was the last time you said no to something? How did it feel? And what would change if you gave yourself permission to say no more often? That permission is yours. Remember, struggling to say no isn't about being nice. It's about being afraid. Afraid of rejection, of conflict, of losing love. But the cost of never saying no is losing yourself. And you're worth more than that. Your boundaries matter. Your needs matter. You matter. That truth doesn't change no matter how many times you've been told otherwise.